Okay, so here we have Act 5, Scene 3. And in this act, we will see Romeo seeing Juliet, and he will describe his feelings, and this is intending to be psychologically realistic and deep and disturbing, and then he is going to kill himself. In this scene in particular, we're going to pick out some key points. Okay, so how often, when men are at the point of death, have they been merry, which their keepers call a lightning before death? So he knows that he is going to kill himself, yet he feels what? Do people actually feel happy just before they die, do you think? Is that psychologically realistic? I wonder. I mean, I've not wanted to kill myself before, but I imagine that if you've decided to kill yourself, there's going to be an element of, a release of pressure. We call that catharsis. O. What word type do we call the O? It's not a verb or a noun or an adjective. What is it? It's called an exclamation. What's it called? Oh, how may I call this a lightning? Oh, my love, my wife. Now, right here in this point, how would the actor kind of pause? What's happened right here now, do you think? At that exact point in the play, what's physically happened? Yes, wonderful. So here you would look at maybe the actor would need to stop, change his body language. Maybe now, would he be quite so happy? Maybe that would be the whole point change. Remember what we did with the English language, the change in tone. This would be the happiness, the peacefulness, the sense of catharsis, but now he's going to build up the tension again. Death, that has sucked the honey of thy breath, has no power yet upon thy beauty. Now look at this wonderful metaphor. What are the connotations to this metaphor? Sucked the honey of thy breath. Superb. So sweet. The words are sweet, succulent, tasty. Also, would you go so far as to say that honey itself is a long-lasting foodstuff? Maybe again suggesting that her beauty and her life is long-lasting. He's saying that she is not conquered. Now, folks, that word's very important because if you look at traditional Elizabethan love poetry, Petrarchan love poetry, and certainly after the Elizabethan period, we have what we call the metaphysical poetry. Women are there to be what? To be conquered. It's a game. And if you look in particular at the poetry by this man called John Donne, he wrote a poem called The Flea, and it's all about how he's trying to trick a woman to being with him, suggesting that if a flea bites her, then bites him, or vice versa, there's a transference of blood from one body to the other body. So why don't they just kind of get together because a flea's done it for them already? This idea of conquering, does that sound like an equal relationship to you? For the Elizabethans, they'd be very confident and comfortable with this idea that a woman is there to be conquered. Her will is there to be broken down, particularly, I imagine, in arranged marriages. Would a contemporary Western audience be as confident in that word? No. So again, you can definitely there get great contextual analysis with that one word, conquered. What's that word? Right now in your books or somewhere, draw a little picture. You must remember this word, conquered. Because for me, it will always allow you to talk about context and the comparative context of the contemporary uncomfortableness with this. And the Elizabethans would probably understand this word a little bit more. Question: would the Elizabethans all be completely comfortable with that word as well? What a joke. Of course not. It's just that I imagine they would understand probably more openly the idea of being conquered. Do you know yourself any love songs or poems now that talk about one person conquering or beating down somebody else or winning them over? I'm sure you do. So, beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and thy cheeks. That means like its flags. And death's pale flag is not advanced there. Notice here with Shakespeare, what's he doing with this image of conquering and battle? Nina. What were you thinking of?
I was thinking how her lips are red and in her cheeks, she's not dead, she's alive.
No, good. Wonderful. That's very important. This whole scene is full of dramatic irony. It's about this idea that the audience realize that Romeo's commenting, oh, it looks like you're almost alive. Death has not yet conquered you. Nina? Yes. This is very interesting because the flag belongs to death, suggesting that death owns her, but there's also a sense of giving up. Yet, contextually, what is the thing that Romeo is going to do that's really about giving up? How would they feel about that in the Elizabethan period? It's the worst thing you could do. Tybalt, you liest there in your bloody sheet. So Tybalt said at the same time, oh, what more favour can I do to you than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder his that was mine enemy, fine enemy. Forgive me, cousin. So he's actually talking to Tybalt's body there and he's trying to reconcile himself. Then it's hyphen, dear Juliet. So now his attention's back onto what we see. And often, why do you think directors cut out that whole scene or the whole part with Tybalt? Yes, this idea, particularly that the modern audience has quite a narrow attention span and we can't possibly hold the idea of an extra character in there. Dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Oh, I wonder. Do you think maybe the actor would even turn to the audience a little bit in some performances and say, why are you art so fair? And someone shouts out, because he's still alive. And again, bear in mind that theatre in Shakespeare's time was not like what we experienced, where it was very stuffy. The actors would react possibly to the audience as well, and vice versa. Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous? What does amorous mean? It's a French word. That the lean abhorred monster keeps thee here in the dark to be his paramour. Now, what's a paramour, do you think? To keep you to be his paramour. It's like a mistress. It's silly, not a wife. But again, that death owns Juliet now. What kind of tone do you detect here from Romeo? How does he feel about death and Juliet and that relationship? He's talking about conquering. He's a bit jealous of death, isn't he? For fear of that, I will stay with thee. He's saying, for fear of death being your new boyfriend, I'm going to stay with you.
So he's romanticizing the fact that she's...
Yes. Excuse me, Stuart said a wonderful point there. Say again. Wonderful. There's a personification of death that the Elizabethans would again be very comfortable with. This idea that death himself, the Grim Reaper, and again, that's interesting contextual information. And never from this palace of dim light depart again. Do you guys like that idea of palace of dim light? Is that a positive or negative image, or is it more than that? It's a lovely grey area, and folks, quite frankly, there's so much stuff to say here. Shakespeare is all about psychological realism. He is both happy and sad, both despondent and joyous to be with her. Palace of Dim Light absolutely underscores the fact that he has these mixed feelings. For you, you're going to be talking exactly about the fact that Romeo here is mixed in his feelings. Does that make sense? And you can say that really in most scenes. Here I will remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Now, folks, it's really dark here. I want you to realize the following. Shakespeare has a lot of references to worms eating dead bodies across his plays. We call this intertextuality. Intertextuality, thank you. And again in Hamlet, he talks about this idea that a king can pass through the guts of a beggar. And he speaks about this idea that when a king is dead, he's buried in the ground. The worms eat the coffin, eat the corpse. The worms come to the surface. What animal eats the worms? It is the birds. Then the peasant or the beggar then kills and eats the bird. Then the bird, which contains the worm, which contains the king's body, passes through the guts of the beggar. Now, this was written by Shakespeare. Do you still find that image intriguing itself? What does it say about power as well in terms of the idea that the body of a king that's untouchable if you touched a king, what would happen to you? You would be killed, you'd be executed. Yet it's possible for a beggar to kill a random bird and, not just touch the king, but for it to pass through the guts, which is obviously a euphemism itself. Okay? Maybe you might make mention of that idea that Romeo talks about worms, Arthide chambermaids, that this imagery of worms, often used in Shakespearean plays to represent the arbitrary nature of things. Do you know what the word arbitrary means, my class? Arbitrary. Arbitrary means that things aren't necessarily definitive or definite. It's kind of random how things turn out. Now, what would be the dominant idea of society and spirituality in Elizabethan times? Would it be that everything's random and you've got free will? Or would it be that everything's ordained and stars, and things are set in the stars? Now, of course, society would be more complex, and this is really the beginning of the early modern period where we're having colonization and ships are going across and culturally things are changing. So Shakespeare really is demonstrating in this arbitrary image of worms, which links to elsewhere in his plays, that actually life is a lot more arbitrary than we kind of want to think about. By an accident of birth, you could be in a very different situation in life. Does that still speak to you as a human being in 2017? And this is really what the analysis of Shakespeare is about. He demonstrates that human beings are complex. They're not just good or bad. Romeo is weak in some ways and strong in other ways. He's impetuous in some ways, but considered in other ways. He then says, possibly his most famous line in Romeo and Juliet, "Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh." Look at that line, world-wearied flesh. Go on, what are you thinking, Dora? Yes? Yes? Yes. So this flesh is not only his flesh that's wearied, but it's also symbolically and which society are they living in right now in the play? What's it called? It is for the people watching it, but in the play itself, in fair Verona. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace. Here, he's talking to his body as if he's disembodied now. He's already given up on his body. The language has switched it. He is like, disembodying himself and doing it. He's objectifying his body. And lips, O you, the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Folks, look at this rhythm here. Arms, pause, take your last embrace, pause, and pause, lips, pause, oh you, pause, the doors of breath. Look at this pausing. Now look at the last line, just before he kisses Juliet. A dateless bargain to engrossing death. What's happened to the rhythm of that line? Good. The iambic pentameter is now becoming smooth, suggesting how does he feel about his incoming death? Good, he's got it right. He's accepting it. Kisses Juliet, takes up the poison. Come, bitter conduct. Come, unsavory guide. How should the actor be acting this with all the commas now? Good, pausing, broken, upset, anxious. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on. The dashing rocks thy seasick, weary bark. Here's to my love. Drinks the poison. Oh, true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus with a kiss I die. Now, folks, that is a weird line. That's a strange line. Why would you, when you've just died, say, "Oh, doctor, your drugs actually worked"? Now, this is, I think, being used by Shakespeare because in case someone was being a bit dim earlier, or they weren't really listening in the play and they missed the part where Romeo had got some drugs, it's literally, I think, telling the audience, I've just taken these drugs. Does that make sense? That line is literally for there. Now, that's not really for analysis. That's just for you out of interest. First, with a kiss I die. And again, it's so the audience know that he's died. Does that make sense? Go.
Could it be like that five maybe subconsciously more than does?
Okay, that's interesting. I would certainly want to see you have an idea like this. And yeah, maybe you could say that he doesn't really know he's going to die because again, Laith, what would the Elizabethans believe about the act of suicide? Spot on. Now, there's also problematic because if Juliet didn't die, then would Romeo and Juliet actually be reconciled? No. So again, it suggests this kind of fragmentation of Christian belief of what would really happen. Okay, folks, shall I put that on?